Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Cyber Resiliency. Are you ready for anything? My name is Peter Schulz, and I'm an offering manager with IBM for Cyber Resiliency, and I'm going to be walking you through this presentation today. To start with, just a brief look at the agenda of what we're going to cover. First, I want to dive into what is cyber resiliency, and then expand into cyber attacks and how they're spreading, and then look at the business impact to your business of cyber resiliency and the spread of cyber attacks. And then we'll talk about the cyber resilience life cycle and how you can deal with these cyber attacks that are affecting your business. As I go through the presentation today, if you have any questions whatsoever, please post them in the comments section of GoToWebinar, and we'll be taking those questions at the end. What is cyber resiliency? Cyber resiliency is an organization's ability to continue delivering the intended business outcomes despite adverse cyber incidents. This is an area that is the joining of security, traditional security, plus business continuity, plus organizational or networking resilience. So it's bringing together a number of different disciplines within your organization to deal with cyber threats, because they truly are something that are different than the traditional business continuity management approach that you may be dealing with. And so it requires an end-to-end approach. It requires working together. And in large organizations, it gets a little messy. It can be a little bit even more broad as those the disciplines that you're dealing with cut across different organizations, different departments within your broader enterprise. You want to make sure that all of the pieces of your business that are set up to deal with managing your systems, managing your risk, managing your governance, and keeping your business running are working together to ensure that you're ready for cyber attacks. And cyber attacks are spreading at a just unbelievable pace. Wherever you go, cyber resiliency is a universal challenge. So some statistics to look at here: by 2020, there will be 20 billion things to secure. The Internet of Things is really changing the way we look at devices that we have on our networks. By 2020, there will be 5 billion personal data records that have been stolen, and over 8 trillion lost to cybercrime. The research numbers and the spread of impacts to businesses that we're seeing in the news, it's just exploding. And all the while, the security pressures on our organizations are continuing to grow. Compliance mandates, regulatory compliance, are changing the business environment that we operate in, and new regulations such as GDPR can cause huge fines for our businesses if we're not taking care of the data that our customers entrust us with. There's also an enormous skills shortage and many unfilled jobs because there just aren't the skills out there to fill them. And what we're dealing with in organizations are pulling together disjointed groups with too many different tools from too many different vendors trying to solve these problems. The World Economic Forum this year, in the Global Risk Perception Survey, listed out the different attacks that are, or the different issues that are facing businesses that can likely cause impacts. And cyber attacks which is circled here in red, is third on the list of most likely to occur, and near the top in terms of impact to the business. Attacks against businesses continue to double. They've doubled over the last 5 years, and predictions are that they'll double again this year. So the financial impact of these cybersecurity breaches is serious and significant to businesses today. In 2017, some of the largest costs that businesses faced were related to ransomware attacks, and they accounted for over 64% of all malicious emails that businesses received. We'll talk some about some of the specific attacks, but one to highlight here is the WannaCry attack, which affected numerous organizations across the globe, and NotPetya, which I believe now the number is almost 400 million in damages. So these are really significant attacks that have been crippling businesses in terms of costs, and I think we're still just coming to grips with what it's going to take to recover from these. So I want to dive in a little bit to cyber attacks and explore some of the different types. We did an in-depth analysis of the different attacks that have occurred over the last couple of years and categorized them into 6 categories that I have listed here. The first is just exploration. So, what are the goals of attackers? Sometimes they're just curious, exploring what is possible. In decades past, that meant creating a virus or a worm that spread and maybe defaced a website or a computer screen just to see if we could do it from a hacker's perspective. But in modern times, that's exploring, can we take control of the brakes of a car? Or can we get into IoT devices in the home and view what's going on in the camera? And so it's becoming a more significant problem in an environment where regulatory compliance is growing. If you're the vendor who provided that connected device, and your customers' data is being viewed remotely, and the impact that could cause on you. The second category is data exfiltration. Hackers getting into your network to steal intellectual property or user data. Again, something that's facing increasing scrutiny for regulation agencies. Customer credit card or banking information. And so what we've seen over the last decade is an increase in these cyber attacks coming after ways to monetize themselves. And so being able to steal and exfiltrate data from your databases on banking or credit card information allows criminals to do that. The third category we see is resource usage. So if a hacker can get in and access your servers or the devices that you've provided, they can set up coin mining and turn unused CPU time or unused network capabilities or otherwise unused into something that they can use for financial gain. The next category is ransomware, and so this is what was really in the news significantly in 2017. We saw a lot of cyber attacks that would encrypt your data and then hold you hostage, and it's continuing into 2018, as we saw recently in the United States. In the government of the city of Atlanta had hackers hold them at ransom and had all their services be unavailable, government services. So it's becoming an avenue for criminal organizations to basically extract payments, whether they can re-enable the data that was encrypted or not. The next category I want to talk about is destructive behavior. Attacks that come in and attempt to wipe data, shut down your servers, or in even more disturbing attacks impacting utility systems, electric or water, or in the last category here we saw nuclear plants. And so these are starting to bridge into state-sponsored attacks like the last category, which we saw with Stuxnet and election interference. So this is the climate that we see currently happening with cyber attacks in these different categories. A study from the Ponemon Institute last year took a look at what the top causes of cyber disruptions were in organizations. And so this was a survey done of organizations who had faced data breaches. And of course, this question that was asked of organizations, the answer could have been multiple avenues of attack. And so the numbers here add up to more than 100 because the respondents had multiple avenues of attack in each case. But the one that came out on top was phishing and social engineering. So finding ways to get your employees to divulge the information necessary for attack. What I found most interesting was that significantly down the list was out-of-date software. I think most often organizations think if I'm able to keep all of my hardware patched and up to date, all of the software running on my systems up to date, that I'm not at risk. And really, that's just not the case. What we're seeing is a significant impact from either employees who are able to fall victim to social engineering, or just accidentally left unsecured passwords that are made available unintentionally. And so those avenues of attack are still a significant cause of these intrusions. As I alluded to, often these new attacks permanently destroy systems instead of just going after financial gain. And that can have a much more significant impact. In the case of NotPetya last summer, we saw this specifically in some organizations that were in the news with the impact that it caused to their business, the disruption of having all of their systems unavailable for, in some cases, weeks at a time, and just not having the ability to respond and have their critical business systems back up and running when destructive malware comes in and takes those down. Similarly, as I alluded to in the City of Atlanta case, when critical government systems were encrypted by an attacker, the city was unable to continue with some of those services, and we've seen similar things with other attacks. And so it's really important that you understand the broad spectrum nature of these attacks, and that it's not just a disturbance. It can be significant damage to your infrastructure that you have to attempt to recover from, but it can also be financial gain. And so there are a lot of different areas that you really have to start thinking about how you're going to deal with the risk to your systems and recover from those outages. So let's look at the business impact that these cyber attacks can cause. There's a couple of key areas where we see cyber resiliency challenges in the modern world. As I said, cyber espionage and ransomware is on the rise. We see a rise in targeted advanced persistent threats. But the attack landscape is constantly expanding and changing, and what these attackers are trying to accomplish is frequently changing. And so it's getting more and more complex. At the same time, your organization itself is getting more and more complex. As organizations move to the cloud, deploy mobile solutions, allow for remote working, and start to embrace devices, it increases the number of attack vectors that can be attacked, and it also just increases the complexity of what you've got to protect. We see malware that are propagating to backup copies. So even organizations who have a great plan in place for backing up all of their systems are seeing attackers specifically target those backups and corrupt them. And so that can wreak havoc with the recovery plans. But even if you have multiple recovery options in place, that can cause recovery to take too long. And so even if you have a great system in place and you can recover, if you're out of business for days or weeks at a time, what's that going to do to your operations? And then lastly, we see significant regulations that are imposing new requirements, data breach notification requirements that are coming with GDPR. In the United States and other places, we're seeing financial sectors choosing to join sheltered harbor to try to avoid more significant regulations. And those requirements put additional burdens on companies in terms of how they're going to provide solutions. Specifically with sheltered harbor, it requires air gap protection in place and a third-party site for sharing data. And so as you start adding all of these things together, it makes for a landscape that is much more challenging. Attacks are also becoming much more costly and more likely. A couple of statistics that I'll point to here. The average total cost to organizations of a data breach last year was $3.62 million. So that was one organization's cost of a single attack. The estimated global cost of just the WannaCry attack last summer was $4 billion. And for one company, as I mentioned before, over $300 million. The odds of experiencing a data breach over the next 2 years are estimated to be about 1 in 4. So 1 out of 4 organizations who are operating in the modern world are likely to face a data breach of some kind over the next 2 years. That's a pretty amazing statistic when you think about it. Just the odds of that are, I mean, it's a near likelihood that you're going to face this problem. And so it's not really a question of whether you're going to face the problem, but really when. The cyber resiliency programs that organizations are attempting to put in place are also under significant business pressure. So there's the velocity that organizations are moving at. It just means that we're not able to deploy the systems we need at the same pace to deal with the new changes that are going on in the business. And so it really makes it difficult for us to keep up with the changes in terms of the systems that we have in place. Second is the complexity of these advanced threats. As I've alluded to, the threats that are out there are evolving rapidly. The complexity of them is growing, and the environment that we're operating in is changing as well. And so the traditional systems that have been put in place just aren't keeping up with the complexity of these new threats that are out there. And from a liability standpoint, organization obligations are growing, and so it is, it's now not as much a question of can we afford the new systems that we need to put in place or the new processes that we need to put in place, as much as it is we can't afford it because of the risk that we're under. But meanwhile, operations teams have a challenging mission. The security, the IT operations groups at organizations, have to process all of this intelligence and outthink all of the cyber criminals out there that are coming after them, all of the different attacks that they face on a daily, if not hourly basis. They have to protect all of the critical data, the users, applications, and infrastructure that they have. And if there is something that gets through an attack, they need to respond and recover nearly instantly to keep the business running. And so the expectations are high, and from an attacker's point of view, all that they need to do is to get through once. And so it really seems like we're facing an uphill battle. And many organizations are overwhelmed with the data that's coming in. One survey said that analysts are only able to keep up with about 8% of the information they need to do their jobs. 93% of security operations center managers are not able to triage all of the potential threats. And 43% of security professionals say that they ignore a significant number of alerts. We already mentioned the jobs that are out there that are just going unfilled because there's a skills shortage globally. It feels like a significant challenge to really address this. One way that we talk about this is with the phrase "the boom event," and so I want to walk through a scenario of an attack. And so in this case, we start with the left and we go across. You have a phishing email that comes in. Maybe it's broadly sent and members of your organization receive it in their email. Maybe it's a targeted phishing attack or a social engineering attack where a single email is sent to a key personnel with enough information that it seems very plausible that it's a real email. In any event, when that person clicks on a link or opens an attachment, malware is deployed on their system. It only takes seconds for credentials to be stolen and remote access to the network to be gained. And once the attacker is in, additional compromises to be deployed. So we're in the first few minutes of this attack. We could have encrypted communication back out to a command and control system with the first public indication that something has happened before we even know as an organization that something has happened. And so in this case, a law enforcement agency places a call to the CEO to let them know that they've found this attack. And boom, that's where we become aware as an organization that our systems were not ready. And now we're in the recovery mood. So we talk about left of boom and right of boom as two different really clear areas to deal with as an organization. Obviously, the more that you can do to protect against the left of boom with detection capabilities, insights into what's going on in your network, what's going on in your systems, automated handling of sifting through all of that data, the less likely you are to face a boom event. But again, as I said, it's really not a question of if, but a matter of when this is going to happen. And so no matter what you do to prepare yourself for the left of boom, you also need to be prepared for the right of the boom. And as you look at the points that are listed here, the reputation that the company has starts to take a hit in terms of public sentiment. The stock price may fall. We need to start communicating as an organization about what has happened. So holding press conferences, possibly talking to news media. And then we have to find out how this happened and how we're going to address the hole that allowed the attacker in. Find out if it's an insider. Are there victims, or was this perpetrated by an employee of our organization? Dig into the forensics, because as we're starting to have those communications, we need data to be able to provide a clear understanding of exactly what has happened, so that we're not just basically having multiple press conferences saying we're not sure. And having a plan in place to release what we're going to do to solve this problem, to notify our customers, our partners, respond, and then work with the legal and regulatory issues and governance issues that have fallout on the other side of this. So it really is a full life cycle of dealing with this problem. The pain points evolve as cyber attacks change. It's really important that you have a precise, immediate response, but that you also are able to recover as quickly as possible, and that you have the evidence for any audit or compliance actions that happen, so that you're able to provide that audit trail of exactly what happened. So I've covered a lot of the landscape for cyber attacks and how bad this problem is, but there is a way forward, and we see the Cyber Resilience Lifecycle, which is put out by the NIST group, as really the key way that you can think about addressing this. And so the NIST cybersecurity framework identifies 5 key parts of the life cycle. They are identify, which is defining your plan and building that plan out, addressing the risks and just putting a plan in place of how you're going to deal with them. Protect, which is trying to stop everything at the front door. I like to think of protect as being the locks on our door, the locks on our windows of our house. And so, we've talked to our family about a plan, and we've locked all of the doors before we go to bed. And then the third area is detect. And so detecting those threats with advanced analytics, this is really where you have tons of data to sift through. And so having systems that can automatically categorize that data and limit the amount of manpower that's needed to go through it is really critical. But once you detect it, and in the house analogy, the burglar alarm goes off, you have to be able to respond, responding effectively to cyber outbreaks and taking action. So you need to, as we looked at the boom life cycle chart, on the right side of the boom, you need to have your plan in place. You need to have your groups who are ready to talk to the press, to inform the board, and to make sure that this last point, recovery, is happening as quickly as possible. And so the last part of the life cycle is recover, and that's all about getting back up and running as quick as possible. The faster that you can detect the attack, respond to it, and recover your systems from it, the less cost to your organization, the less impact to your reputation, and the less downtime that you'll face. If you look at sort of a timeline of the history of where we've been, going back to the 80s and before with centralized mainframes, all the way up to what we're in now, the cognitive era and predictive AI-based orchestrated response. As the systems have gotten more advanced and the attacks have gotten more advanced, we are now in a place that is more increasingly technology-led, services integration-led, with software-defined solutions that are helping to respond to these. One key thing I'll point out as you look at this chart of the different waves of response to these attacks is the recovery time. In the early days, a recovery time was weeks to days was okay, because these systems weren't always necessary to keep our business running. But as we've moved over, that has shrunk down from days to hours to minutes, to where we are now, which is in many cases these systems do not allow for any downtime to keep our business running. And so this is really a look at how important insight AI, predictive analytics, and orchestration have become in dealing with these cyber attacks. And so we believe that the future of security is all about orchestration and AI, accelerating those security outcomes, proactively identifying threats, gaining actionable insights without the need for analysts to sift through all of the data manually, and being able to respond quickly with competence, with orchestration and automation, so that you're not relying on a run book with people who are pushing buttons to make things happen. Instead, you've automated the system from end to end. Now, that's not really the case for a lot of organizations today, and so we recognize that and have put together a cyber resilience readiness level. Level 0 is I don't really have a plan. That plan is fragmented. Level 1 is I have some targeted projects for cyber resilience. Level 2 is sort of across IT, we have a plan in place. Level 3 is cyber resilience as an advanced IT program where automation and orchestration and AI insights are beginning to be a part of it. And level 4 is a full enterprise program where we have orchestration across the board, including all of our systems and the third-party suppliers that we have as well. Just one aside on third-party suppliers. I myself was the victim of a cyber attack, and as somebody in the security space, it is somewhat embarrassing to admit that. But I was caught unaware by a piece of software that I used and trusted and have never had issue with. They were attacked, and the attacker uploaded malware as part of their download service, and the software that I was using was automatically updated by this trusted third party, which deployed a piece of malware. Fortunately, in this case, I caught the attack before anything bad happened, and that isn't always the case. And so it's really a reminder that no matter how much care you take, how much precautions you take, if you have trusted third parties and they have a gap in security, it can affect you as well. And so as we get up to the top level of this chart, looking at enterprise programs, it not just only pulls in all of your own organizational challenges, but it starts to look at your suppliers as well, as that supply chain can be the area where attackers are able to break through. So taking that chart and of the life cycle and sort of turning it to look at how we can use that to think about what kinds of systems we can deploy. If we go back to identify, it's things like threat intelligence, offense testing, identifying what are the crown jewels for our organization, what we need to protect, what the protected data is that we need to be protecting, who our privileged users are, so where the risk is, and who our power users are, as well as that third-party risk. The protection part, awareness training, we talked about the fact that employee vulnerabilities are one of the top ways in. Patching is of course important, and automating that as a process, dealing with vulnerability management, ID governance. So just like you protect passwords, protecting IDs into your physical buildings, and protection technologies and policy optimizations to ensure that these stay up to date. As we move over to detection, having a 24/7 operations center that's detecting what's going on, a good alert system to limit the need for a person to be involved, tying that into business context and use cases, and into the playbooks that we have set up of what we're going to do. So that moves into respond. Once we've detected something, we have our playbook, we have our incident response systems in place, and so we have a plan of what we're going to do to respond. The best way to really create these is through simulations, and so going through a broad variety of simulations to see how your organization would have responded to existing attacks, to ones that are known, and what the incident management and crisis communication plans are. And then from a recovery standpoint, having the remediation plans in place, an orchestrated recovery system in place that's part of our business continuity or DR program, and then supplier management, so we're looking at that third-party supply chain, and then reviews that take place after the action. And so that's sort of going across, a look at going across the life cycle, and we do it that way to show that there's a 360-degree view here of going back. And so as you go through this, hopefully only through simulations, you can then deploy enhancements to the program, deal with change management and issue management, look at the metrics and reporting and the governance processes that are involved, and sort of go back around and go through it again to address and improve on those areas. And so if you look at the cyber resiliency life cycle in that way, and you're essentially continually going through reassessing, going through the identification step again, and taking it all the way through with simulations through to recovery, learning from all of that, building it back in and doing it again, it really gives you a great system for being able to have a plan in place so that when a real attack happens, you're not only ready, but able to respond before your organization faces downtime. The key that I want to get across in this presentation is that faster detection and nearly immediate orchestration are critical. And so as you look at some of the different areas that you need to really be thinking about, those are the ones that I think it's most important to focus on. Orchestration and automation, eliminating the manual steps in all of your processes is going to really enable you to deliver a better response to whatever the attack is. And going through those simulations is really important. A couple of things I'll just point out here. Immutable storage, using immutable storage for backups to protect your clean images is a great way to make sure that attackers don't get in and affect both your production systems and your backup systems and cause you to really have no further options. Air gap replication or virtualized air gap replication allows you to keep attackers quarantined to an area of your network. And so you hear a lot in the security community the term defense in depth. Having a number of different areas that you control differently with different access, different networks, allows you to limit and contain any breaches that do occur. And so those are a couple of the key areas that I just want to highlight, but there are a lot of innovations that are happening in the security space, and likewise, as we talked about before, the types of attacks are becoming more complex, and so we need these innovations, but being ready to deploy them and being open to, if we go back to the previous slide, to thinking about this blueprint as a 360-degree view, where it's not a one-time thing where I create a plan, put it in place, and I'm done, but rather something that's a living, breathing document where I'm looking at new innovations in the industry on a regular basis. I'm looking at new innovations in the attacks that are happening and reassessing my plan based on those. that really helps you to be prepared for whatever comes your way. To be in a situation where you can deal with all of these attacks, there are a couple of points here. Orchestration, we've talked about having orchestrated management to support decreasing the time it takes you to respond. Having remotely hosted immutable storage helps you protect and have a clean copy of data that you can always refer to. Semi-automated recall, again, as much as you can automate, the better. It improves the speed to respond, the accuracy you can respond, and your success rates. And then having your own customized validation metrics to address the regulatory issues and business demands that fit your organization, that's going to help you prepare for the level of risk that you're facing as an organization. So here's another look at the lifecycle chart with some of the services that IBM provides. And so I just want to walk through a couple of these areas of what this might look like for a typical organization, of how we help them to solve these cyber resiliency issues today. When you're identifying a plan, we have a number of services that can help with that process. When you're looking at protection, we offer managed services, we offer software, and we offer services that can help you to put that in place. So, things like backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. In the detection case, we have some of the industry-leading solutions around our X-Force brand. And we also have resiliency orchestration, which allows you to have dashboard monitoring of your cyber incidents, of your RTO and RPO, your recovery time or recovery point objectives. Being able to respond with our X-Force Iris products and having consultants on tap to come in and help with the response, so that you don't necessarily have to have a staff always in place for it. And then recovery with our resiliency orchestration, backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, and also with our multi-network WAN support and X-Force Iris incident response units that are available. And so we look at this life cycle not just as sort of industry guidance and a best practice, but we look at it as we build the services and offerings that we provide to customers and make sure that we're offering a number of different choices across all of this and innovating in each of these areas. On the identify side, we have some cyber resiliency offerings. We can do short-term preliminary assessments to longer-term rapid risk assessments and plan development. And so we can help you develop that strategy and roadmap of how you're going to respond. From a protection and detection standpoint, I mentioned X-Force Red, X-Force Iris, and of course our resiliency products. And so we can help provide a much faster investigation time, a reduction in false positives, and our systems can automate those alert management so that you don't have to have users looking through each of them. And on recovery, an industry-leading disaster recovery solution that provides an automation and an orchestration capability that can provide 60% reduction in your DR test times, 50% reduction in dependency on outside help, and a 75% reduction in the people resources needed to do a failover. Being able to get to a point where you can fail over from production to DR at the click of a button, completely and entirely automated, is doable. We have customers who are doing it, and it can really change the game in how quickly you can respond. If you want to learn more about any of the services that IBM provides, or just look at the the life cycle itself and think about how this can fit into your organization, we have a site that you can visit at ibm.com/cyber-resilience, and that can provide a number of additional videos and resources for you about the space and the solutions that we have available. With that, I will take questions. Again, if you had a question, please post them in the webinar chat, and I will go through and answer those now. And if I'm not able to get to all of the questions, I will certainly follow up after the webinar. So one question here is the cyber insurance market mature enough to offer the coverage that organizations will require in order to meet the challenges described in this webinar when they materialize? That is an excellent question, and we are starting to see more cyber insurance offerings. And so, it's a difficult question to answer, is the market mature enough as a whole? But I think if you put the life cycle that I mentioned in place and you go through that identify step and you have a good understanding of the risks that you face as an organization, where your key resources are that you need to protect, and what the likelihood of impact to your business is, that's the material that you need to go to an insurance agent, essentially, and say, how can I get protection against these risks? And so I think that is a key point in the identify phase of going through that, and certainly having a level of cyber insurance to help you cover the financial costs to your business in the event of an attack is a reasonable way to address the risk. And I don't think that is a replacement for putting the systems in place to respond, but it's certainly a good option to have as well. And so if you go through that identification part and have a clear understanding of the risks and where you're vulnerable and what the cost would be to you if those risks materialize, then you would have the data you need to to talk to an insurance option. Next question was, will the presentations be available after, and will it be possible to review the recording afterwards? Yes, these will be posted and available on the BCI site. Another question was, a cyber crisis response differs from a regular crisis response. What should the focus be, and should there be a separate cyber crisis management plan? Yes, absolutely, a cyber crisis differs from a regular crisis response. We didn't go into a lot of detail of the ways, but I'll just briefly touch on some of them. In traditional DR, what we've used over the past decades of weather outages or facility outages, those types of outages are typically more predictable in terms of the effect and the containment or scope. If you take the example of a hurricane, I grew up in South Florida where we faced hurricanes on a regular basis. As far as natural disasters go, you generally have a few days of guidance from weather services that they're coming. You certainly know if you're operating a data center and facilities within an area that is hurricane prone, that it's a risk that you face. And when it happens, it typically is an event that takes out power, causes flooding, it could potentially completely damage your environment. And so the response is pretty clear. You need to have a backup that's not in a hurricane prone area. And so from a weather related disaster event, I guess we have decades of experience with how to deal with this. And now if you take that and you correlate that or compare that to a cyber attack, cyber attacks are much more random in how they manifest themselves. They are much more targeted often in terms of what systems the attacker comes after. We've seen statistics that show that The majority of attacks happen without the organization even being aware that the attacker was in the network and was impacting systems, at least in the early going. And so attackers are, human, not weather, and so they're smarter and able to take a targeted approach to what they're doing. And so there definitely is a difference, and I think the focus needs to be on thinking through those risks, simulating those risks, and having a response plan in place for the impact that could come from those risks. And I do think that having a separate cyber management plan is important, or at least sections of the plan that deals with the different types of cyber attacks. Okay, so another question, and again, if you have questions, we do have a couple more minutes. You can put them into the chat. One other question was, can you run over what you mean by playbooks under detect and respond? I missed that part. So a playbook or a run book, is typically something that we have in place that says, this is what we're going to do when this happens. And so the detect and respond playbooks are the actions that we're going to take as an organization when this type of event occurs. And so a traditional run book is the steps or the process that will follow to recover. In the case of detect and an initial response, it may be the steps that we're going to take when we see this type of an anomaly, of who we're going to inform and how we're going to dig into the forensics and data to determine what the next steps are, because we may not always need to move to recovery, and so the playbooks for detecting and responding are how are we going to deal with the situations that present themselves. And so again, the more that you can do simulation, the more that you can take events that are in the news of attacks and run through them in your own organization, the better you are prepared to answer the question of how you would have dealt with it, document it, make sure that you then move to automating it. And it looks like we don't have any other questions. So with that, I will wrap up this webinar. I thank you very much for your time and attention to this. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to me. Thank you very much.